This is a quote from Bobby Fischer, who is credited in the statue people section of Twitter for his very good pattern recognition, which is evidently true from his very high IQ and from his achievements in the world of chess. The part of the quote that really sticks out here is the Soviet communism is basically a mask for Bolshevism. This is a really ridiculous and absurd thing to say because there's just no mask. The words are practically synonyms. The ruling party of the Soviet Union was always the Bolshevik Party. In fact, the word Bolshevik might be a bit broader than Soviet because it simply means what faction you were at in the second RSDLP Congress. Many groups who were in disagreement with Lenin about governance were in agreement with him at the second RSDLP and with the October Revolution. This quote reminds me of something from a book I read on Napoleon, where there's this man who had very limited knowledge of European politics, but he did read all the newspapers from Europe. And what he said is, I like this Napoleon guy, but I hate Bonaparte. Because that was how he was referred to by French and British newspapers, respectively. The French called him Napoleon, the British called him Mr. Bonaparte. And so it seems really silly for this very smart guy to make such a retarded statement. But if you think about it, it actually appears to be his lauded pattern recognition at work. So the word Bolshevism is more so exclusively used, because it's a scarier word, more so exclusively used by the critics of the Soviets and not the liberal ones. The liberal critics of Soviets usually use the words just Soviets itself, socialists, or most often communists. It's more so the fascist critics of Soviets who would rely heaviliest on the exclusive use of Bolshevism. You can see how Joseph Goebbels' speech emphasized the word Bolshevism, particularly because he hates Slavs, and it's a scary sounding Slavic word that is more so that can be used to represent the Russian horde better. My little brother is a bit of a 4chan user. He uses it all day, and so he really likes Avola. And he told me to read the book Avola wrote, a handbook for the right wing youth. And one of the first statements in the book that really stuck out to me was, liberalism devolves into socialism, which devolves into communism, which devolves into Bolshevism, which is an even more absurd and retarded thing to say. And it didn't really age well, even if it was worded right. But see, this is how Bobby Fischer, it's also Robert Fischer's, pattern recognition was part of him saying this incredibly stupid thing, because he wasn't consciously engaging with the concepts. His pattern recognition was deriving the meaning of the words from the context of how they were used every time they were used. Soviet was the contentious word used by, and communism, used by its opponents and supporters. And Bolshevism was used, of course, in the party name, but he encountered it probably more from people who were exposing Soviets, likely exposing them as internationalists or as Jewish. So he thinks that to say Soviet equals Bolshevik is pulling back the Wizard of Oz curtain, even though they are everyone else who understands the concepts understands them to be basically be synonyms. And this is interesting to me because I am friends with someone on Discord who would probably agree with this quote on screen, and refers to himself as a national socialist of the Hitlerite variety. And when he's trying to articulate his views on his own, in his own words, he doesn't particularly do that well. His communication relies on a very high level of context. A lot of the times when he's trying to communicate his beliefs on you, he simply floods you with the media he consumes rather than express it himself. A lot of this media can be proven to be false upon checking it. But it's interesting to me about this pattern recognition thing because if your beliefs can't really be expressed out loud correctly, and you're relying to make someone agree with you, you're trying to drown them in the media environment that you have put yourself in, that this is this pattern recognition. And the pattern recognition, which is very, 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 very useful, is falsely assumed to be this highest form of intelligence that's just purely logical, purely analytical thing. Pattern recognition is possibly the way in which you're most susceptible to have your brain like corrupted and turned completely out of touch. Yes, it will never not be useful. We need it to learn everything and to do pretty much everything. And there's an evolutionary trait to help survive predators, and it's been essential every step away for human technology. But we have to consider the fact that we aren't as much confronted with this cold, hard, objective truth that we can't avoid as we were. We often construct our environment, and we construct what stimulus we get. We don't really live in touch with the real world as we did, and that was leading up to the digital age. That's true, and especially in the digital age, that is true. It's fair to say that most of the stimulus we receive in the day comes from electronics. We do it for hours, and it is very, very intense. It can completely warp our realities, and often we find that we live in completely different realities because of the different content we consume that feed different lessons into our brain. And politics is an example of this you can imagine. But you could say that this is a rather mild and gentle one. Very, of course, on the internet, there's tons of documentaries about people who get too far into a niche and then their mind just becomes utterly broken and corrupted. Of course, there's various poisons online, such as pornography, which doesn't just addict you to it. The people who are addicted to pornography have their perception of the world and what's okay and normal and what a partner is supposed to be. They're just utterly corrupted, and sometimes people act out in a way that is very porn addicted, and you can tell that there's someone porn addicted in line in real life. If you were to act this way, like in that one 4chan green text, it's certainly spottable, and everyone call you out that. More online, porn addicts will kind of pretend that it's just completely normal and they're completely normal people for doing so. Also, kind of because they've created a different social world where people are different, or this alternate reality where different behaviors are normal. And actually, I've been kind of, I actually had that, but it was reversed. And I sort of discovered that it was the reverse of what I thought. I actually had it a bit more wholesome view of the world up until 2022, which I'll talk about. Maybe I'll make a video, mention that in a video later about elections. But yes, the pattern recognition is a very, very useful tool. Like every tool in your brain, it's supposed to be a servant of a sound mind. And just remember that there's not, and just a general rule, there's not going to be ever be some overpowered trait that is going to make you this undefeatable machine on its own, except that one that is just a sound and a reasonable mind. Don't ever get really stuck into having too much of one trait and that being this thing that is magically golden and always aligned with the truth. That's all. If you can count, I've said an unreasonably amount of time in this video. If someone can count all the uhs, I will feature that comment when I make the next video. assuming anyone comments or gets this far anyway. Have a good one.